to Mr. Kohberger, to Mr. Kohberger, to Mr. Kohberger, to get Mr. Kohberger's
like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe.
Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And no news still, and with a pretty much a winter wonderland hitting the entire country this week, I don't even know what to think. But I know what frustrates me. If you want to know what frustrates me, I'm going to tell you what frustrates me. And I don't like to be negative. But when I sit back and I look at everything that's gone on in this case, and I look at how deeply entrenched the guilters are at this point, 2.5 years down the road, they're entrenched. There's no speaking any logic to them. Most of them don't even realize the real facts of the case as they change. So I sit back and I go, wow, how do people get so blindsided? And then I start to look at the culprits. And the culprits, in my humble opinion, are the mainstream media. They're the main culprit for spinning all the lies and yarns that they spun in the beginning and continue to spin to this day. But then I look at, well, what's their alternative? For 2.5 years, if they didn't go to the mainstream media, well, their alternative was to go to clickbaiters. And the clickbaiters, what do they clickbait and do? They don't do any real investigating. They take a popular story with no evidence whatsoever, no criminal history. They can make up a motive. You can make up a motive for anything. And then they clickbait the Jack D's and the frat boys, and they still do it to this day. No evidence. They haven't dove in. It's just all hypothetical. Well, you could have done it. You frat boys. They ignore the fact that if it was Jack D, you've got to have a whole other conspiracy going for Xana and Ethan with the frat boys. I mean, that's a whole lot of conspiring to take place in a matter of about an hour and planning out a hit from inexperienced people with no criminal records. Man, and then there's no direct evidence to link any of it. I wonder why they continue to spin those yarns. Well, because it makes you click their channel. Real simple, makes you click their channel, and it's done it this whole time. And I remember when I first started, I used to have these bots. I knew I could recognize them. And I'm pretty sure they were FBI bots. And they would try to lead me down those frat boy and Jack D theory paths, and I would just ignore them. And they finally left me alone. They just quit coming to my channel, thank goodness. But these other people out there, I mean, they're easily manipulated, and they're going to continue with that stuff. And what's bad is at this point, the people that aren't full guilters, I mean, you'll look at it and you'll, oh yeah, I like that theory. Let's latch on to it. The only problem with that is, as I aforementioned, it was done for a reason. Nobody ever stopped the Jack D and frat boy theories because they wanted you to do that. What has it done? It's entrenched the guilters in their place. It's done what it was designed to do, and it continues to do it to this day. Why am I saying all that? Because I still, for the life of me, I can't figure it out. I still have people, some of them that have actually been with me for a while. I seen in my video yesterday, Pavarotti, you're not a plant that was paid for by law enforcement to be on here to take the heat off of the frat boys, are you? I'm like, come on. Good grief. Are you serious right now? There is no heat on the frat boys or Jack D. Okay? There's no heat. Law enforcement ain't looking at them because they have nothing to do with it. I mean, investigators in the case have a brain. They cleared all the people close to the case immediately. They got their DNA. They got Jack D's DNA. He gave it to them, took a lie detector test, as well as the other frats that were around the case. Oh, man. There is no heat on them. Law enforcement, they're never going to look at them because they don't have anything to do with the freaking thing. You got to understand that at this point. And why would they have one lone gunman out here, me, on here trying to take the heat off the frat boys? Do you think they're going to have one lone gunman go up against 30 clickbaiting YouTube channels that want to spin yarns and theories about college students that have no criminal history, no known abilities to plan out a 10-minute drug hit? I mean, come on. I got to get all that to the side because we're going to get the yarns and fairy tales out of the way first, because they don't do anything but continue to harm the case and entrench the guilters even more entrenched into their trenches. And we're going to get on to facts because you know what? I deal in facts. And I let the facts speak for themselves. And I don't accuse innocent people because if they don't have a criminal record, if you watch any investigation, okay, what's the first thing that they always say? Okay, this suspect has no criminal history. That's the first thing they check is, do they have a criminal history? Have they broken laws in the past? Well, I mean, that's kind of a way that they can look into the future. Now, people absolutely do change. It doesn't mean just because they've broken laws in the past, they're going to break them in the future. But that's the first thing they look at is for propensity. None of the college kids have broken any laws in the past, especially as it relates to something like this. And guess what? To my knowledge, they haven't broken any since then. So I look at the people that are more likely to be involved in this, which are the people that have broken those laws, people that are in that type of business where things like this happen. And turns out by doing that, well, I found all kinds of direct links to this thing. Not pie in the sky, it was the ex-boyfriend. But I can't explain the other three, so I got to go make up a fight at the frat house. And that accounts for the other two. So it was the ex-boyfriend conspiring with a completely different frat, and they all got together. And, come on, man. Anybody that spins those yarns to this day, you need to look at them a little bit closer and see how much investigating they're doing themselves, or are they just spinning yarns? And you'll know if they're doing real investigative work or if they're taking their friend Bob's, suggestions on facts of the case and reading off of that. Is that really investigating? So when they come up with their master theories, how well thought out do you think they are? Or are they just designed to get you to click on their channel? I don't care if you click on my channel or not. I'm not clickbaiting you. I'm trying to get the real information out there. So back to what I was saying. We're going to dive into some facts in this thing. And I'm going to show you some things that, based on the facts, especially the facts of the case as it relates to the court record and the things that were taking place at the times that these things were happening, I think I'm going to be able to show you why this thing is so confusing. And I'm going to show you some key aspects of this that really entrench the guilters, that if people would have just done a little bit more investigating of their own, the guilters wouldn't be entrenched like they are to this day. And it's a very important part of this case. So I think I'd pay attention if you want to really know something in this one, because I'm going to share you some real stuff. They want to snow us in. Either God wants to snow us in this week. The court wants to not tell us what's going on. Well, it's time to expose some real deal facts to folks. Let's do it.
So if you can go, using your experts, and your experts kind of can tell me and state that you need to investigate particular people, okay, that were involved in this, particular people, okay, that were involved in this.
John Judge knew all along this was a multiple perp crime. That's why he couldn't help but overextend his mouth a lot in court, call Kohberger Kopaka. And anybody that tries to tell you he didn't say Kopaka is probably a real paid agent by the state. But what did he say right there? Again, overextended his mouth. Said if you can investigate the real people that were involved in this, he knew there was real people involved in this that wasn't Bryan Kohberger. He may have believed maybe Bryan Kohberger was one of them, but he knew that this was a multiple perp crime. I don't believe he even believed Bryan Kohberger was one of them at that point. But what led him to believe that? Well, how about the facts of the case? I mean, John Judge said in that hearing, I've read through all of this. So he had a pretty good understanding of what was really going on. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is what the real gag order was about. And when you start to take facts in the investigation and you apply them to the case and the things that we know now, and you go back to the beginning, the things that we learned then that we speculated on. Now when we go back, those things that we speculated on become a little bit clearer, because when they first came out, guilters would try to explain things away, like the initial request for discovery. They would try to explain it away. Well, this is boilerplate language. They asked for this on all of them. Well, it turns out, no, it isn't boilerplate language. They didn't ask for that on all of them. They asked for specific things on this case. And as we've seen this case progress, we've seen those specific things actually pan out. So if some of them pan out, I'm sure all of them would eventually pan out. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So when we go back to January 10th of 2023, we see that Ann Taylor puts in her initial request for discovery pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 16. And she asks for specific things when she puts in this request. The first one she asks for is statements of the defendant. Permit the defendant to inspect and copy or photograph any relevant written or recorded statements made by the defendant or copies thereof within the possession, custody, or control of the state, the existence of which is known or is available to the prosecuting attorney by the exercise of due diligence, and also the substance of any relevant oral statement made by the defendant, whether before or after arrest to peace officer, prosecuting attorney, or his agent, and the recorded testimony of the defendant before a grand jury which relates to the offense charged. Well, we know that he didn't have we don't think he had a recorded testimony before the grand jury, but did he make statements that they needed to get from law enforcement? Has that panned out? Yes, it has. When we go to November 14th, 2024, this is the defense's motion to suppress and memorandum in support of the search warrant for his home on Lambsden Drive in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Now, if they're wanting to suppress it, we know that it exists. And it says that Bryan Kohberger wants and has the following memorandum and is contemporaneously filed motion for order suppressing all evidence gathered by law enforcement as a result of entry into and search of Mr. Kohberger's parents' home on Lambsden Drive in Albertsville, Pennsylvania, including statements made after his arrest. So when we go back to this first discovery request, any relevant or recorded statements made by the defendant. Well, we know because of the motion to suppress now that this was legitimate information that the defense needed to properly defend the case. So when we go to the second part, this isn't boilerplate language, folks. This is statements of a co-defendant. The only reason to put this in there is because they needed to know if there was any statements made by a co-defendant, any written or recorded statements made by a co-defendant, and the substance of any relevant oral statements made by a co-defendant, whether before or after arrest in response to the interrogation by any person known by the co-defendant to be a peace officer or agent of the prosecuting attorney, or which are otherwise relevant to the offense charged. Well, who is the co-defendant?
Kohberger's.
If the magistrate judge had been told there's unknown male B in blood in the house attached to the handrail, that might have made more of a difference to her. Maybe a sheath that can be carried to the house and blood in the house that's not the same, maybe that matters.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it
brought
anyway
up-
because blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved if you assume that that blood was related to, well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because, well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because.
See, when most people listen to that, they miss the key words. And the key words in that wasn't necessarily that it would lead him to believe that there was another perpetrator. The key words were, like I just showed you a couple of times, was the judge saying, well, I said I wasn't going to do this, but since you brought up the unknown male blood, what do you mean, Judge? You said you weren't going to do this. Who'd you say that to? Did you say it to yourself, or did you say it to other people in the closed hearing? You see, when they say stuff like that, it lets you in on secrets. It lets you in on secrets. I said I wasn't going to do this. I wasn't going to bring up the other suspect. But since you brought up the male DNA, I'll go ahead and bring it up. Doesn't that mean that there could be other perpetrators? You got to be able to read between the lines. They've always had a second defendant in the case, a co-defendant. But that co-defendant's no longer alive. Now, people say, now, Pavarotti, why wouldn't they just, if they were going to put it off on Kopacka after they unalived him, why wouldn't they just say, well, this was the killer and now we've killed him? Because you have to understand where they were in the investigation when they got onto Kopacka, and you have to understand circumstances around the case. They would have never suggested that Kopacka went in and did this on his own. They know this was a multiple perp crime. They also had a theory based on everything that they had put together that the white car was part of the crime. Now, we know that the white car doesn't park until at the very soonest 4:09, and it speeds off at 4:20. Well, they say the crime happened between 4 and 4:25. So even the white vehicle doesn't match up to what they've suggested the crime is as one perpetrator. They've always thought it was two perpetrators. So when they got a search warrant for Kopacka and they went in and unalived him, that's where they were at in the investigation. They hadn't proven their case yet. They got on to Kohberger from Kopacka as their second suspect. So why wouldn't they just say Kopacka did it? Because by the time they arrested Bryan Kohberger, the gag order was in place on the case for probably that reason right there, because they know the second that they told the public that there was more than one perpetrator involved in the crime, then it's no longer a random Ted Bundy event. It is a hit. If there's more than one perpetrator, then it is a conspiracy. It is a hit. You even heard Ann Taylor. You even heard Nancy Grace when she was, hammering Howard Bloom. She said, what are you trying to say now? This was a big conspiracy murder? Yeah, because the second you put more than one person in it, that's exactly what it becomes. Then there has to be a reason for it. And that reason has nothing to do with frat boys and Jack D. That reason has to do with the real facts in the case that I've gone over with you so many times. I mean, I don't even know how many more times I have to go over before people realize the facts of the case and why this thing happened. But keeping that in mind, that's where they were at in the investigation. They unalived Kopacka early morning hours on December 15th. When you start to hear other things that will be relevant in this case, such as the K-bar knife, you're going to know that certain people to this day, they still suggest it. And we all assume that, they're just making up evidence and lying. They suggest right out in the open that Bryan Kohberger had purchased a K-bar knife off of Amazon before this crime happened. Well, it's hard for us to get our minds around that, but I assure you that is going to be a big part of this case. And you know that when you listen to this.
So the state makes the point that, similar to the one that Professor Kerr made about going and getting bank materials, once those were things that could be done simply and efficiently via these records, a person didn't have to go out and get the cash. The state argues in this case, because of Amazon, Mr. Kohberger didn't have to go someplace to purchase items. All of that would have been out in public, but he's doing it on his computer, and so why should that make it private?
And the case that we're talking about is the Amazon records, and that's what has to do with the third-party doctrine. And the U.S. Supreme Court case State v. Miller is the controlling case here. And Idaho courts, as explored in my briefing, apply Miller. And there's no reason for this court to diverge from that Fourth Amendment analysis. The documents are Amazon's business records. They detail transaction history. Business records are most akin to bank records, which is allowed. Applying the court's reasoning from Miller, again, these documents are business records of Amazon. They're not the defendant's private papers. Amazon is a party to those transactions. They have a substantial stake in these records. And the defendant took the risk when he revealed his affairs that this information would be conveyed by Amazon to third parties, including the government.
You see, this is where things get serious, because the morons out there that spin the Jack D and the frat boy yarns because they really think they know something about the case, this is where they're going to get us blindsided when it comes to the K-bar knife and the K-bar knife sheath purchase. Because if you don't understand what went on in the case and what they're referring to right now, and you don't understand that there is two different people that are actually being prosecuted for this case. One of them's not alive, so it's a completely different matter with him, but they're going to try to get Kohberger with guilt by association. And if you don't understand the K-bar knife sheath aspect of this case as it relates to Amazon, then you're going to get things really, really messed up for our guy. I'm just going to say it that way. Educate yourself so that you can educate the public. If you really are trying to do something good, you have to understand this. When it comes to the investigation into the case, according to the court record, they did not get on to Kohberger until the IGG on December 19th. So when they start talking about the Amazon knife purchase that happened before then, they're not referring to Kohberger. They're referring to Kopacka. And it's clear as day if you understood what actually went on in the court record. There was different Amazon searches conducted. The one that you hear them discussing in court right there is not from the initial Amazon warrant. That is for the warrants that took place in the middle of the year in 2023. So when you look at a statement made before they got those Amazon warrants in the middle of the year in 2023 from an insider in the case, not knowing that this was going to be released to the public, like the Steve G texts, you know that they're talking about two different things, whether they knew it or not. Here's what I mean. Now, you got to remember the Steve G text. These are texts that took place with Steve G and a online sleuth not long after the arrest of Bryan Kohberger. So when he tells them they have him buying the K-bar and trying to hide how he purchased it, they haven't even done the Amazon search that you're hearing them discuss in the courtroom right there. This is information garnered from the first Amazon search. And it wasn't Kohberger that he's actually referring to. In his mind, it may be, but law enforcement have probably let him know that they have him buying a K-bar and trying to hide it. But law enforcement isn't telling Steve G that it's Kopaka and not Kohberger at this point. He probably still doesn't know to this day. If you followed the case and you've studied the case record, then you would know this. And I've gone over this with people many times in the past, but sometimes we forget. This is the record from the first Amazon warrant that they got, trying to figure out who purchased the the K-bar knife from Amazon. And when they applied for this warrant on November 26, 2022, they were lost in the investigation. But when they received this information back from Amazon on December 8th, 2022, by this time they had their two jailhouse snitches in there putting a name in their heads. So when they took all the information from the return of this Amazon warrant on December 8th, matched it up to what the jailhouse snitches was telling them, it gave them a suspect. And that suspect it gave them was Kopaka, in my humble opinion, and all the evidence leads to that if you keep your eyes and ears open. So when you hear them talk about somebody purchasing a K-bar off of Amazon, they're not talking about Kohberger, and I'll prove it. Because if they knew that Kohberger had purchased a knife off of Amazon based on this warrant, then there would have not been a need for a later warrant searching Bryan Kohberger's Amazon search and purchase history. They were hoping to find another K-bar being purchased so that both assailants would be using the same weapon. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Let's look at the next Amazon warrant. You see, this is the warrant that they're referring to in that hearing. And this one, as you can see, was filed on May 8th, 2023. And it was served for some reason on May 10th, 2023. They didn't get it back. And it was Field Agent Michael Douglas who received it on June 27th. Excuse me. And then for some reason, they didn't turn it back over to Mowry by email until July 5th. This is a significant time past when Steve G was talking about they had him purchasing the K-bar knife. This was a blanket search of Amazon trying to see what all Bryan Kohberger had even put in his cart and viewed, much less purchased, which tells us that they don't have him purchasing an Amazon K-bar. At the most, they have him searching Amazon and maybe putting it in his queue. But if you're not familiar with the records in this case, you'll get this messed up and you'll continue to put false information out there and not preparing the public for what's about to take place in this case. And if the public's blindsided, well, then Kohberger's chances are slim to none. But if the information is actually put out there to them and the truth revealed, then they'll go into it with open eyes looking for tricks in advance. So to answer that question that keeps coming up, once again, about why didn't law enforcement just name Brent Kopaka after they unalived him and just put it all off on him and say the case was closed? Because they truly believed that Kopaka was a suspect. They were still conducting their investigation. It was just a search warrant when they went to pick up Kopaka. they never name a suspect until they make an arrest in a case. You hear it over and over. Well, we're not going to tell you because we're investigating the case. It's an active investigation. When they arrested Bryan Kohberger, they immediately put a gag order on everything in the case. So they would have never, to this day, the non-dissemination order still exists. They would never come out and say, Kopaka, to this day. They would just steer you away from it because they know the sooner you know about two assailants, the sooner you're going to know that this wasn't a Ted Bundy hit. And that's going to hurt that college town, I assure you. So they're going to put it off until the last possible second, but they kept letting little things slip. And all you have to do is pay attention and you'll be aware of those little things that slip. But that's why they didn't name Kopaka, and they still haven't to this day. That's what all of the non-dissemination order, gag order, sealing in this case is about. You've got to separate the two. But once you understand the two, then you can start to assign what the evidence is really linking to. They're trying to link a lot of the evidence to Kopaka, and then Kohberger is guilt by association. That's what this case is about. And if you disagree, you're not following the case. Plain and simple. But I'm waiting for something to happen in this thing, so you can see I'm getting frustrated more and more by the minute. But that one needed to be put out there. People need to understand those things. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. And until next time, Pavarotti's out.
Fly away. It's the first time of today.